For millennia, our ancestors carried a nation's founding story on their backs as they wandered the face of the earth. Unbeknownst to them, they also carried a separate, parallel story. But this story wasn't passed on in books and in scrolls. It was passed on in their cells. A secret story carried inside their genes. A story not told in combinations of 22 Hebrew letters, but rather encoded as 22 amino acids. Now, our genome is forged through a brutal and unforgiving gauntlet of natural selection. Through this process, our DNA holds genes that gave our ancestors a fighting chance, genes offering resistance to certain diseases, or genes that gave us the ability to just barely digest foods that others simply could not. Much like the darker pages of the Bible, these genes tell stories of war, of plague, and of starvation. But like the Bible, our genetic saga also contains happier and uplifting stories. If you know where to find them, you can find stories of motherhood, of romance, and of peace, if you look hard enough. Most of us know the story of the 4 biblical matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, whose descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. The Ashkenazi genome tells a different but parallel matriarch story. Genetic analysis tells us that 40% of the Ashkenazim in this room all descend from just 4 mothers. 4 mothers who lived in Northern Europe 1,100 years ago. Now, one thing I'd like to know, between the cries of labor on a cold winter night in northern Germany, did a voice from the sky whisper into the ears of these 4 European Jewish women? Did it promise them that their children would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the sea? I'd like to think so. After all, their 3.5 million descendants alive today would outnumber the masses at Sinai 2 to 1. I'd like to think so, but we'll never really know. We can't even know what their names were, because our genetic story simply isn't written that way. But as we get better and better at reading it, it may tell us things about these 4 ancient mothers that the written word never could have told us about Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, such as what they looked like. This is my genetic portrait, a projection of what I should look like based entirely on my genes. You could have projected a genetic portrait like this the day I was conceived, had the technology existed at the time. And one day, we may uncover what our ancient mothers looked like, and what they sounded like, and whether to them, cilantro tasted like soap. It probably didn't. For what it's worth, I don't descend from one of those 4 mothers. On to our next story. You know of Aaron and his sons, the first high priests of the nation and progenitor of the priestly Kohanic tribe. An ancient priesthood passed on from fathers to their sons, or as we know today, to the hundreds of thousands of men with the last name of Cohen or Kaplan. The genetic story tells of this as well. Studies have shown that up to 80% of Kohanim today, be they Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Ethiopian, or Samaritan, they all carry the Cohen modal haplotype on their Y chromosome. Unique markers on the only chromosome passed unchanged from fathers to their sons. Analyzing the rate of mutation a 2006 study calculated that the common ancestor of all these Cohens lived approximately 106 generations ago, or roughly 3,300 years. Now, Jewish liturgy is known for its deepening levels of revelation. The same goes for the story inside our genes. On the surface, the story of the Cohen modal haplotype appears to be telling one about Aaron and his sons. But look deeper and you will find that it's actually a story about their wives. The preservation of the Cohen modal haplotype means that for as many as 106 generations, those wives were loyal to their Cohen husbands, because one case of infidelity in those 106 would have caused that genetic marker to disappear completely from the line. In fact, this high rate of genetic similarity in today's Kohanim has resulted in the highest paternity certainty rate ever recorded in any population genetic study ever. These wives have been loyal to their husbands for the last 106 generations, more than any population ever studied. So while the story of the Cohen modal haplotype appears to be a story about Aaron and his sons, it's actually a story about their wives. Not about those men who inherited the priesthood by birth, but those hundreds of thousands of women who chose, through love and through faithfulness, to preserve it. And so it appears to be a grand genetic epic of ancient royalty and priesthood. At its core is really just a love story, one that spans 106 generations, which might just make it one of the greatest love stories ever told. A story that crosses the deserts of Ethiopia, to the Siberian tundra, through the forests of Europe, across the seas, into this very room, but not onto this stage, because I am not a Cohen, not by name and also not by genetics. There are no Cohens anywhere in my paternal line, just lots and lots and lots of Ashkenazim. By genetic analysis, I am entirely of Ashkenazi descent. My ancestors lived among Europeans for over 1,000 years. Every point in this cloud is a person's genome. The distance between each point illustrates the genetic distance between them. The closer they are, the more closely related. Here are the Asian genomes, the Europeans, among whom my ancestors lived for over a millennia, the Africans, and the Bedouin. Here are the Druze, and here are the Palestinians. And that pale blue dot is me. Zealots on both sides of the Israel-Palestinian conflict often justify their claims by insisting that the other group simply isn't from the neighborhood. The Jews, they're not from here. They all descend from the Khazars of Eastern Europe. The Palestinians, they don't even exist. They all migrated here 150 years ago from Egypt and Algeria. Both genetically and categorically false. A look inward at the makeup of your genes can serve as a humbling experience. Not long ago, we all lived together in the same place, in peace long enough to make lots and lots of babies together, babies from whom all of us descend. This also might explain why today we see so many successful organ transplant matches back and forth across the green line. In our cells, we carry stories, stories of disease and death, and stories of parenthood and faithfulness. What's beautiful about these stories is that they aren't carried in each of us. They're carried in all of us. Your own individual genetic code tells us absolutely nothing. The story within each of us can't be understood on its own. These stories can only be extracted by understanding and analyzing the genetic similarities and differences between us. It's truly a story that we carry as an entire nation. And I, for one, eagerly await its telling in the exciting decades to come. Thank you.
My mother always said that she never believed in God until she had children. And I have some friends who are startled to discover that holding a sleeping baby feels as much like worship as saying the traditional liturgy once did. Parents have a unique lens and a unique way of engaging with the world, and they can teach us a lot about what spirituality and spiritual practice are and can be.